Guys, welcome back. It is Racer X, and today I actually want to give a little bit of a comparison between the brand new car that I bought. You can see it right there. That is the 2020 Mustang GT Premium, and of course we have Mrs. X's 2019 Challenger Scatpack. And I just want to give you my driving impressions of driving these two cars in terms of how they drive different, what's better, what's worse, the little factors that go into deciding which one of these two cars you might want to buy. I want to give you my impressions after obviously now owning both of these two cars. Thought it might be just a fun little video. So we'll go ahead and give you those driving impressions. Also, guys, if you are new to my channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button for me. I've got all sorts of great content coming up this year. It should be really exciting. Also, follow me on Instagram, and we are off. We got the 1,000 horsepower helmet. God. So for those of you that actually follow my channel, you might have seen just a couple of days ago, I picked up this bad boy. And yes, the 2020 Mustang GT. This is the premium with the Recaro seats in it. I absolutely love the interior of this car. And I have to be honest with you, I've driven many of the 10-speed Mustangs, as well as, of course, the Scatpacks. You guys have seen me drive all sorts of these types of cars. You've seen me review them, put them up against each other in the 60 to 130 test, the 0 to 60, all sorts of stuff. But now that I actually own the car, like I said, this is the premium edition. I want to kind of give you just my normal driving impressions. So perhaps you're somebody that's out there that maybe thinking about buying a Mustang or a Challenger or both. You never know. I'm going to kind of show you how these two cars drive different, because they do in fact drive very, very different. And they both provide a very satisfying driving experience. Now, before we actually get into driving, I do want to cover just a couple of quick things. And I know I've covered this before on some of my other videos, but obviously there are some big differences between the engines on these two cars. So obviously here in the Mustang, you do have that 5-liter naturally aspirated Coyote engine, but this thing packs quite a bit of punch. 460 horsepower, dual overhead cam engine, 4 valves per cylinder, actually quite a bit different than the Scatpack. Now, the Scatpack makes more power, as we know. You're looking at 485 horsepower, 475 on the torque. So that's really one of the big differences. The Hemi is very torquey. I talk about that all of the time. But then you're talking about 2 valves per cylinder in this one, and this is, of course, the single lower cam on this. So a very different engine setup altogether on this. So while this one does produce more horsepower, it is also heavier. You're looking at about a 600-pound weight difference between the Challenger Scatpack and, of course, the Mustang GT Premium. And you do feel it when you drive it. Also, 8-speed transmission versus a 10-speed transmission. Of course, both of these cars are automatic, and both of these transmissions are actually phenomenal. So really quick, before I forget, I also want to talk about the tire setups on these two cars. Both of these two cars have kind of the stock, what I like to call the crappy setup, which is you got your RSA 2s here, the Eagles on the Scatpack. Those are 245 in width, which are just completely inadequate for this car. But as much as she drives, that's what we're working with. And of course, on the Mustang, we've got Pirellis and 235s on the back of this car, and that's also extremely inadequate. We'll be changing out the tires on this bad boy here very soon. So definitely something to consider. But really, both the tire setups on these two cars, not nearly enough meat under the back for the amount of power that these things put out. I do want to give you a real quick look at the inside of these cars so you can see how different they are as well. Now, both of these cars, for sports cars, actually have quite a bit of room, and they're very comfortable, both of these. But I absolutely love the red Recaros in this. As you guys know, I'm a huge fan of black and red, and you can see this is a very neutral driving position here in the Mustang with the digital dash. Also very, very neat, which I'll show you here shortly. And then as we walk, of course, over to the Challenger, I've got the two cars kind of parked fairly close to each other, but I do want to show you the inside of the Challenger. Many of you guys are well aware of what the inside of the Challenger actually looks and feels like. But there you go. These Mopar seats are actually bigger than the Mustang seats. They don't hug you, even though they look very bolstered. And they're actually better for like somebody who's really large in stature. But both of the interiors on this car are very, very comfortable. And as you can see, this one is driver centric. The dash does wrap around towards the driver. Very different from a gauge cluster perspective. I mean, these two cars both have great infotainment screens here in the middle. Both of them are great to drive for very different reasons. One other quick thing of of note, and a lot of people really just kind of overlook this, but if you look at how these two cars are kind of lined up here, very similar to, to how they're lined up. But as we step over to the back side of the cars, you really get an idea of just how much bigger the Challenger is than the Mustang. The Challenger is just a bigger car altogether. You can see it sits up higher. It may be a little bit hard to tell in the camera, but the Challenger easily sits a couple of inches higher than the Mustang does. Just a completely different shape on these two cars, but they're both phenomenal in their own right. So let's go ahead and take these things down the road. Now that I am aboard the 2020 Mustang GT, it's just such a different feel to this car. Obviously, I really do love the feel of these Recaros. Of course, these are specialty seats. You don't get this in the normal Mustang GT. And of course, I love the red as well, as I mentioned. But I will say, just from a driving position perspective, the car is very neutral in feel. The digital dash is the way to go in the Mustang GT. I absolutely love the digital dash because, of course, you have this like my color option where you can change you can actually change the colors of your ambient lighting. You can change the color that your dash lights up, which is not an option in the Challenger. The dash in this car is it's just shorter. I mean, the dash on this car actually looks pretty short compared to when you're in the Challenger. The Challenger, you really, when you drive it, it really is kind of a muscle versus a sports car feel to these two things because as I look at this, the dash is shorter, the hood just looks shorter. It feels like a smaller car, and it is, but the Mustang still has a lot of room in here. I don't feel like I'm claustrophobic or whatever when I'm in this car, and visibility is still pretty darn good in this thing. So you have to kind of give it to Ford when they designed this, because they were able to keep it for a smaller car. They were able to keep it kind of nice and open, and it has a really nice feel to it. One of the things that I actually really like about this Mustang GT are obviously you got the digital dash here, and the drive modes, the way they're set up. Actually, you change your drive modes right down here with this switch. And but I want to show you what happens on the dash. So right now, as I go to change my drive mode, not only do you have this kind of snow wet feature here. Now I did change my color to be purple and red, which I think is very cool. Lots of options there. Now as we go up here, we can also change this to normal, and you'll start to see things change here a little bit. Now we'll go up here. You've also got sport mode, which is a really fun way to drive this car. Shifts come a little bit faster. Now, one of the things that I do like, obviously, when you jump up here to track, you get a completely different look and feel. It tells you to look at the manual for this. And not only that, not only do you get track in this one, but you also get drag strip mode, which I think is very cool. So things change a little bit in terms of the shift points on the drag strip mode as well. So a lot of configurability to this particular Mustang, and you don't get drag mode actually in the Scatpack. You just kind of get the you get the regular street, sport, and track, but not necessarily drag, and you don't get the wet and snow feature in that car either. So definitely a difference. So as I drive the Mustang, I can definitely feel that the car is smaller. It definitely doesn't feel heavy or anything like that. Now this car is somewhere around 3,700 pounds, and you can definitely feel it when you're driving it. It doesn't have quite that same initial tip in that you would get on the Scatpack, which is one of the things I absolutely love about the Scatpack, is just how torquey that thing is, and just how little effort that Hemi kind of puts out there in order to move that car. You would think, being a heavy car, that the Hemi would really struggle to move all that weight, but it is actually quite the opposite. Because of that large displacement, the weight actually doesn't feel like it's there at all, because the thing, that Hemi just just crushes it out of the hole, and it just wants to snap your head back. And this car, as you tip into the throttle, it's a little bit different feel. So as I tip in, it doesn't really hit like the Scatpack does. You can definitely feel it. It's got power. You can feel that it's there, but it doesn't have that initial like neck snapping pop that the Scatpack does. The Mustang 10-speed is just phenomenal in this car. It really, really is. And there's something to be said for a manual car and how much fun a manual is to drive. I still love a good manual transmission, but I mean, you have to give it to Ford, because this 10-speed transmission just makes this car really what it is. And it does lack kind of that low-end torque that the Scatpack has. But when it comes to actually just shifting, and once you really kind of get into the mid-range on the power, and this thing starts revving out to 7,000 RPM, that's where this thing really shines, because it just starts to pile on the mile an hour. And you can see why these 10-speed Mustang GTs, at least the newer ones, the 18s and up, are so formidable from a roll, feel, because that's really, with the 4 valves per cylinder, that's when that engine really starts to breathe and do its thing. And you can feel it when you drive it, because that thing is just shifting like crazy. Let me give you a look at it. So let's listen to the Mustang do its thing on this little back road here. I'm kind of tipping in. It still feels very powerful, but here we go. Listen to the downshift. Woo! She's cooking. She is cooking. Now, I am just driving the car around in sport mode at the moment, but even in sport mode, the Mustang, you can just feel that the 10-speed is just working all the time. It's trying its very best to keep you in the power band. You're working with a smaller displacement engine in this one compared to the Scatpack, obviously quite a bit smaller, 5-liter versus 6.4. And it's just that something about that Hemi that just creates all that punch. But this thing, you really feel it shifting. I mean, it's constantly shifting, trying to keep you into the power band. And when you lay into it, you can, this thing downshifts like crazy. So the thing about the Mustang is that it doesn't really feel like it's trying to get away from you because of the way that the power comes on in this car. Very linear, it's very smooth, and the car is just constantly shifting, trying to put you in the power band. But the power delivery is very smooth in this car, so it doesn't really feel like the car's trying to get out from under you. It kind of inspires a lot of confidence when you drive it, and it just really does. I mean, the car really comes alive as you start to build more and more speed, and as you approach the triple digits, the car really doesn't feel like it wants to slow down much. I mean, it just really carries speed nicely. So completely different driving experience than the Scatpack. So let's go ahead and jump on over to the 2019 Challenger Scatpack and see how things change. Now I am aboard the 2019 Challenger Scatpack, and it's just such a difference when you sit in this car. As I mentioned, the dash in this car is so much longer. This car is a shaker edition, so you actually have the big shaker scoop sitting in front of you. It really does have just a big brute force type feel to it versus, so it has that muscle flair to it very, very much. And it's just a monster. It feels completely different than driving the Mustang. One thing that I do like about both of these two cars, obviously you've got the configurability when it comes to the drive modes, but also the steering. So, I mean, you've got several different modes in the Challenger, just like you do the Mustang when it comes to the steering. You get your track, sport, and street. And typically I just keep the steering in street. It kind of keeps things with a nice medium weight to them. But things do change, obviously, when you switch it over to the other modes. And of course, you also get your traction control settings here, just like you do in the Mustang. So a lot of things are actually similar with these two cars, but the driving experience is quite a bit different. So I'm actually just going to tip into the throttle a little bit. I always say the Hemis are just so torquey, and man, do you feel it when you're driving this thing. And yeah, I mean, I do like to drive it in sport or track, so not everybody likes to do that, but I love feeling the torque of the big V8. And while the Mustang definitely feels like it doesn't want to try and get away from you, this car feels like that's exactly what it wants to do, because I'm rolling at 30. Listen. Oh, gee. There go the tires. And it makes such short work of these 245 RSA2s, where in the Mustang, even the 235s, you have to kind of want to spin them. You can, and the car will do it. But in this car, it just does it, even if you don't necessarily want it to, which kind of adds to the fun factor for some folks, including me. Comparing these two cars really is like comparing apples to oranges at the end of the day. Yeah, they're both performance-oriented vehicles. Obviously, this one, it doesn't feel nearly as light as the Mustang, and it handles that way, and it isn't, right? I mean, it's like taking the Mustang and piling 3 of your biggest, burliest friends in with you just to make the weights equal on these two cars. So there's a big weight difference between these two. So the Mustang does feel a little bit more lively from a handling perspective. This thing is just a sled sledgehammer. It's just a brute force muscle car. And that's what Dodge meant for it when they made this car. So that's part of the fun of it. But I really do enjoy driving the Scat Pack. It has the ability to put a huge smile on your face. And I got to admit that the transmission in this, despite it being an 8-speed versus the 10-speed like in the Mustang, it's still really, really good. I mean, as I carve up this back road, you can really hear that X-Mod going back there. But oh man, the torque in this thing is just it's phenomenal. It really is what makes this car so much fun to drive. So it doesn't have to prance around like a ballerina to put a big smile on your face and be fun to drive. And yeah, the Mustang shifts more often. I mean, it just, when you're driving it, it's just, that thing is just shifting like crazy and constantly putting you in the power band. This one doesn't shift quite as much, but it's still a really good transmission in this thing. The 8-speed in this really moves out on this car. This Challenger, it is so much fun to drive. Yeah, it may not be a scalpel. Yeah, it's a sledgehammer, but that's just part of the fun of a Scat Pack Challenger or Charger. Anyway, just could not be more different than the Mustang. So when you run the 0 to 60 test in these cars, the results are kind of interesting because the Scat Pack it just makes more torque. A lot of times the Mustang actually comes out on top, and it's because this thing makes so much torque that it just seems to fry the tires, and it can be a tremendous challenge getting this thing to hook up. So it's not like it's short on power, it's just the way that the two cars make power and the difference. And the Mustang's power comes on and it's very usable, the amount of power that car makes, and it's very predictable, where this thing just being a head snapper, it's just so different. But things change when you go to the track. Yeah, the Mustang's going to breathe like crazy and really perform on the top end, but like in the 8th mile, that's why you see the Scat Pack perform so well, because you're on a sticky surface where it literally can use all of its power and really plant it. And typically this thing, when it comes to like the 60-foot and stuff, it's the superior car. The Mustang has to reel it in on the top end. So apples to oranges. So I'm trying to think of some really good analogies to compare these two cars because they are so different and they both make you smile. So I guess, you know, we've got all these like superhero movies out and stuff like that right now. So I guess if you were going to compare these two cars to superheroes, the Mustang would be sort of like Superman, and the Challenger is kind of like the Incredible Hulk. There's not a lot of civility to it. It's just a big angry beast, but at the end of the day, who cares? It's still a lot of fun to drive the big angry beast. Or I guess if you were a boxer, you know, I mean, Mike Tyson, this would be a Mike Tyson, and it would be more like a Muhammad Ali in the Mustang and just jab you to death, right? And just shift and shift and shift and shift. And this thing will just slap you across the face and call you stupid. So that's awesome! I know! Well, there you have it. It makes for a very interesting comparison, and both of these cars are fantastic in their own right. So which one is right for you at the end of the day? Well, it really just depends on what you want to do and what kind of car you like. So if you want something that is just a torque monster, that's got a ton of grunt down low, that just has that more, you know, that muscle car feel to it, you will absolutely love the Challenger Scat Pack because it will put a huge smile on your face. And if you're looking for something that performs low end, kind of everything below 80 miles an hour, it just has that ton of punch, this car is absolutely the one to get. Now, if you want something that is a little bit lighter, something that has a more neutral driving feel, something where the power comes on more linear, you will like the Mustang GT. This thing really screams up top. That's where this car comes alive. So you like low-end power. If you want something that's going to scream on the highway and just rip to all sorts of crazy speeds, the Mustang GT. Now, the Mustang GT is a smaller car. It has a smaller back seat to it. So a lot of differences between these two cars, but they're both fantastic, and you really can't go wrong with either one. So anyway, guys, it's been fun. Let me know what you think about this in the comments down below, and I will catch you on the next one. So until then, Racer X.